Okay, we're going to take another look at the faces of ancient Egypt, shown in their art themselves, and I'll show you some other information that correlates along with it here in the middle or so. What we're going to look though at today, rather than all these different places, is what somebody asked me 2 different times in the same day, which was kind of strange, even though I've got a lot of videos people hit on sometimes. Asking me, but what did the exact pyramid builders look like, and so on. One of them thought that they might have been slaves. The other one thought that they might have been someone else. What you're looking at here is a Hathor representation made out of gold, and it's got these strange crystal eyes that are blue on it with this separated dot behind it, and because of the eye's little lensing effect, it kind of makes it look like a real eye. It's got a weird hat that first glance might look like a pirate's hat on top of it, but it's actually like a battle axe. So if we're talking about who built the pyramids, we probably should be looking around the Fourth Dynasty and the earliest dynasties right there around that time. And I'll show you some of that and a few other specialties in the group. So let's just get started here. These are places where a lot of these pictures came from. Starting out, we're looking at what's known as a reserve head from the mid 4th to early 5th dynasties. So this would have been right after the pyramids, the major ones being built and so on, would have been witness to them. Don't know if you can make it out, but there's a little line that goes around designating where the hair was on this person. But they would have been putting a wig on this person, regardless of his hair color, most of which would have been black. Well, we know now that they could have had a lot of different hair colors. We'll get into that slightly here in a little bit. But again, this is a reserve head of the time, 4th to early 5th dynasties. This Museum of Fine Arts in Boston here in America. In the Cairo Museum itself, they show this one. And there's been a few weird comments on this, but this is also the same time period or a tomb that was found just prior to which. And these are seen as princes and princesses, that some of which might have become the actual pharaoh as they grew up. It passed down to father to son to father to son, and of course the first son and so on like that. So the other ones would have been given cush jobs, which weren't really that cush necessarily, because they had to do a lot of things, keep up with a lot of stuff and do a lot of learning and all of this. So we're only now finding out the depth of what these people had known even at ancient times. So again, this is at Cairo Museum, but this is also one that people have made weird comments that this is somebody that looks very Nordic and things like that. Well, I actually think this is a princess rather than a prince at the time, and that might just change your look of things. Some of these statues, if you look around their nose, rather than trying to look them directly in the eye, because the way that they try to make the eyes look, you actually get I do, get a better representation of what the person looked like, almost that you were looking at the person, but you were staring off kind of whenever you were, but you can get that representation if you follow me. This is a known princess. In fact, they found her name is Labtet. She's from the mid to late 4th dynasty, so would have been witness to it in of this time. This is in the Heidelsheim Museum. There's a few of these in there. We'll show you that. Also, you can notice that little reverse upside down V pattern, if you will, or the way her hair goes is actually shown and etched into this too, right there on her forehead. It's a real contrasty picture though. Let's move on. So here's another one that was whoever he was, was the husband to Princess Meritites. This is again the mid 4th Dynasty here. It's in the Museum of Fine Arts. So you're beginning to get this idea that they had somewhat of a Nordic look. And I'm not going to try to put across to you that they were Nordic people, but at one time the same people that we think of as Nordic people were other people that weren't Nordic. It's kind of the easiest way to say it. In fact, the Nordic people weren't the Nordic people until after the last ice age and it thawed and and then they moved there, which we've talked about in a lot of other videos, and Proto-Indo-Europeans and all the things that go along with that. So husband to a princess. This is Prince Senefu Ruseneb, mid 4th to early late 5th dynasties, and I think we'll see his name and his brother's name here shortly, if I can get to the right page. This is in the Cairo Museum. You can see that haircut I was talking about too in that. But let's look at not just men but women, these princesses, for this is the coffin of Kenu Connacht, or it says Kashaba. It's from the 13th dynasty, so it's much later. But I'm not going to try to get into the late dynasties where people try to influx the idea of, well, after they got taken over by the Persians and Greeks and Romans, and no, we're way before that in here, and steering away from even before the Hyksos and stuff. 1800 BC or so, and she's representative of Isis here. That's what that is. And of course, women are drawn pale and men were drawn with red ochre, and that's a symbology that's seen all over Mediterranean societies at the time, so some people get confused. But these people are all the same. They all have the exact same phenotype. Even the two blondes that you see right here is the last two, with the one in the between. And actually out the edge of the screen on the right, there's another one. This is on the tomb of Ramos, TT55. This is during the 18th dynasty, so yeah, we've reached that point here off of it, but I can definitely show you a bunch of blonde and red-haired people way before this point. We'll look at some here in a minute, but it's not necessarily the point here. We're trying to look more at a dynasty earlier than this, which this is the tomb of Nakht, TT52, 18th dynasty. People have tried to say things about this so much, but here's a person with more curly hair, but they both have the same phenotype, and the one on the left is blonde. Kind of has something that looks like a mullet. We'll talk about that also here shortly. Red ochre. So there are blondes in this tomb here, which is the tomb of Mena at TT69. And hell, we could just go on and on. Tomb of Userhat, TT56 in the 18th dynasty. And in fact, I have made a few videos, if you'll go through my library, on certain tombs. Some of which are on a list that I used to have in that 40 videos that I lost the information of, because it was going to feed me for a lot of videos if I wanted to do individual ones, because there was 170 something, I think 173 different depictions in various tombs all over Egypt that were showing red or blonde-haired people, regardless of a dominance of black-haired people. Also, if you simply look up hair in Wiki, you'll see that during this 18th dynasty we were just looking at a minute ago, there are people there that are the representative of curly hair, and it shows a Caucasian with curly hair plays soccer and stuff, but right above that, yeah, that's curly hair, like Herodotus talked about, and they have curly hair, and it's a scalp that's still with the hair that's on it, so it's not a wig. In fact, the description tells you that this is somebody's scalp, natural blonde hair that was under a black wig that was on it. So a lot of these people may have been blonde or red-haired at one time and had a black wig on, because that's the fashion. Just like in a modern day close to us, you'd think the same thing would go on with blondes, and women instead coloring their hair to be blondes, whether they may have been a blonde back in their young days and it turned brassy and brown, or not, or redheads, or auburn, or all different colors, all of which have been kind of found in ancient Egypt. Then in necropolises, which is strangely separated by hair color. Brigham Young University has been there for 20 years looking over a necropolis and going through, and all of them in one area are blonde-haired, and all of them in another are redheads, and all of the dark-haired people in another area. It's like kind of weird. Also, all of them are Caucasians, of course, but here's Khafre, and this is the inspiration for the Sphinx, for it's supposed to be built about that same time and or recarved. And of course there's the story about him falling asleep out in front of it, or later dynasties, and we know that they had to dig the thing out repeatedly over time. In fact, the earliest pictures we have of it, it's just neck up with sand. Here's Amenemhat the Third. This is in the 12th dynasty, and this is somebody we showed a different depiction of just in another video recently. He's the son of what we know of as Sensheret or Sesostris. So you think it'd be like the fourth or whatever off of this, but that has that same little look on him where he's got the bigger ears, where they show that he's listening during that certain period he's got, and of course that's his son, so he carries it on. In fact, remember the stele, it tells you that you had to carry it on. But you can kind of see that sullen look that he's got going on, but also he's a younger man in all these depictions. I don't think he made it to an elder state where as Sesostris did, and of course didn't live up to his father's incredible things. But whenever you've got it all in order back again and the borders reestablished and all these type of things, what can you do to stand out over and above it? I mean, it's not really supposed to be a competition. It's supposed to be a continuation, and that's just fine. The person that did all the work stands out, and then the people after that don't have to do as much if they keep up with things and borders and so on. I'm gotten back to the 12th dynasty though, and so let's go back a little bit here. This is Menkaure and his wife. So now we're way back at 2500 BC. Pretty easy to see their phenotype, but looking at her, one thing that you can tell is you see that little hair that's below that big wig thing that she's got on. There's other little hair there that's just like the hair I showed you on the reserves, showing you that she probably had hair and then they had it under a wig, which could have been a myriad of colors, as we said. Looks like Stacy from high school, by the way. Here's another depiction of Menkaure in alabaster, which is almost translucent here, 4th dynasty. Hatshepsut, 18th dynasty, and I've heard people say crazy thing about this until you turn around and tell them, yeah, this was the one that was the lady. Yeah, this is a lady. Well, no, look, she's got a beard on here now. They even talk about she put on chin beards and did all this stuff to try to pull that off to be the acting pharaoh, and for some reason during her reign there came a moment where she had to step out, and she turned around and said, boom, I am whatever you think that's supposed to be. But that's in the Cairo Museum in Leiden. Here in the Cairo Museum, though, in the 12th dynasty, there's that picture of Sensheret. That's one of the depictions of him. I used that actually in one of the videos that I made of him before. It's not really totally carved in. It could have the little lines on his cowling and stuff, but pretty good depiction there. Maya and Meret, 18th dynasty. I've kind of gotten out of time here, but some of these pictures you just kind of want to go through and show you a little bit of the different variations on a theme of the way they did it too. But anybody recognize this one? It's a not often seen museum piece because it's in Turin, Italy, so it's seen if you go there. He's got that blue cowling on. So not only did they have the red and white hat of other Upper Egypt, but this warrior cap, as it's known in a lot of ways, was blue. So red, white, and blue. But this is Ramses II, or Ramses the Great here. This is 19th dynasty. So we quite often find ourselves in this time frame that's right here. And of course, King Tut's through now, and Seti, and so on. So everybody knows about this. But back to just in general, hopefully you can see it here across the written on the bottom here, but there are two different forms of Nubians that they show over here in the far left, and then a Philistine type person, which I've got a video coming up. I don't know if it's going to come out before or after this, showing you Philistine DNA, and whenever they came in was a European DNA that slowly filtered into the area and doesn't really go along with the biblical idea, or what we've come to know as what we think went on then. An Amorite here next to him, a Syrian, so somebody of Anatolia really, and over here at the far right there's a Hittite. Let me zoom it down so you can see him real quick. If you notice, he's got crosses on his stuff too. Yeah, you see that? So pretty weird. But you also notice that Philistine, which we know of as a European type DNA, is somehow drawn red ochre. And that shouldn't be right, because we know the Libyans around there were drawn just like over here at the right, and the Amorites and stuff, and all those guys. Well, there's not that much difference between people are getting tans. And so you see some of these guys on the right over here are actually supposed to be nobility, and so they probably wouldn't be, or priest and so on like that. So they have that same idea, but some people didn't play the red ochre game necessarily back then that everybody else in the Mediterranean was. Greeks, Mitanni, Minoans, Etruscans. A lot of people, I've said it 100 times. In fact, there's a lot of depictions like this one that you can see, and you can barely make it out in front of the first guy that you're seeing there, but on the left, that's a Nubian with his Nubian phenotype. His hair is getting pulled along with what's out front, and that's listed as an Asiatic, as we know him on the other pictures there, right? Yeah, and then the one on the right, it doesn't say who he is, but he's got red hair. At least that's what part's pulling up, right? So here he is in that smiting pose, which is like Orion and so on, holding on to these guys. And no one will answer for the idea that Asiatics quite often are drawn in the same red ochre coloration, as well as this, who is, again, that's Ramses the Great right here. Just a symbolic color. Was he this dark? No, probably not. But then he wants to place himself as a worker and a warrior and somebody that's been out there. Oh, did he keep himself out of the sun? No. Why would he do that? There's King Tut. He's running over a bunch of Nubians here, being attacked by dogs and stuff on there. And people try to make confusions of it. They even show that on his sandals here, it shows a Nubian and an Asiatic. Well, three weird things about this: that Asiatics are all shown as blondes. Yeah, both of them, left and right foot. Two different types of Nubians here on the right side. But the idea is that he wanted to crush them with every step, even into the afterlife, and so he had these special shoes. These were made for him to wear in the afterlife, so this long distance time afterwards. Yeah. And while that's crushing Nubians, that's also, they were pretty much, had been hit from both sides at that point and didn't really appreciate anybody. But you can see they doubled up on the Nubian thing. Also, at the very end there, you probably didn't see it, there are bows that are shown on there, and that has to go with the 9 bows that they have control over. There are a lot of statues that show lions with their paws over 9 bows laid out. What's that supposed to be? Or is significant like 1 bow and then 3, 3, 3 below it? Because 9 is a completion number. Oh, so all these people are basically father and son, and then that son that got to be a pharaoh ends up being a pharaoh, but the rest of them that are boys get to be princes. But then what does a prince do? Well, he gets to be master of the stables and all these type of things. But you can imagine that's going on through this 4th and 5th dynasty. So some of these scribes that we're looking at here were some of the people's grandkids and great-grandkids from the earliest dynasties that had passed on down and become uncles and cousins and 2nd degree, 3rd degree. You know how it works, right? And because things are passed from father to son, just like the pharaohs, these scribes passed their knowledge of how to make their special paints. And now we're finding all this things about sacred geometry and all this stuff that were passed father to son. Kind of gives a special meaning to it. There's those crystal blue eyes. They have that weird green crusting around them, but that's because they're encased in a little copper ring that's like that eye mascara that they used to make, and then of course it's corroded over time. I'll show you one coming up here that's not so corroded, kind of strange. But that's copper over time and how it's going to look, just like you'd take a penny and it'll end up getting greenish over time. Here's a famous one that I made a video about, and I've shown him in about 20 videos at least, if not 40, huh guys? This they just called the seated scribe for a long time, but now they figured it out. Because, well, I made 3 videos that had him in it, and one that was just about scribes and so on. One where I'm talking about just the crystal eyes. I don't know if you make it out here, but they put a lens effect behind it and a little dot behind his eye that's just a right distance back. That to somebody's eye walking around, it looks like he's following you around, and it looks like a real eye. It's a real phenomenon here because they dropped this about the 8th dynasty, and then all of a sudden the 12th dynasty, it shows up in just a couple of statues, or statues they say is the 12th dynasty, but due to the name it might actually be somebody from the earliest dynasties and their wooden Ka statue. But not to digress, other than the crystal blue eye part, you can see the white part that's in it, and it's got these little scribbles in it. I hope my camera's picking it up and the picture's good enough for it to do. Because that's really a type of white granite that has little pink lines in it, and so like alabaster inlaid to a guitar, they were cutting out these little pieces so it really looked like their eyes. Oh, and by the way, they figured out who this guy was, because out of the group that are mentioned, that are all the other statues that they know the name of, and I've shown you a couple of names so far, and I think there's a couple coming up, end up being named, so he therefore ends up becoming this guy that I can't remember the name of now. After I did the video about it, I remembered it for the next couple, but that was about it. This is copper, and this is the guy that I'm telling you has the ones around his eye that aren't corroded. And yeah, it's even darkened over time, like bronze, and there's brass that gets coppered over time. And I've often said that it's possible that copper might get being named by or for copper rather than been named for Capri and the island of Capri and making it out of that. Regardless of that, this is from the 5th dynasty here, 2500 BC. It's in the Cairo Museum. You still see it today. It's got those blue eyes too. And this is the one that I keep telling you looks like my dad. In fact, it looks like my dad at about 40 to 45 years old, maybe 50 at the most. It's right in that range there, but no, it's right that range. This person is probably about that range, maybe at the most too. But it's one of those things too, if I look at him directly, it doesn't seem to show. But if I look him in the eyes and see the rest of his face along with that, it really looks a lot like my dad. And not so much whenever you're looking dead on, but at this angle right here. It's uncanny. I wish he's passed away now, and just due to personalization, I don't want to show a picture of him and everything, but wow. Another weird thing nobody ever mentions about this statue, and it looks like, from my view here looking through it, that you can see it, that hair scalp that I talk about where it shows you its range going around there. Now, this is a Ka statue, so it's made out of wood. It's either sycamore or yew wood, which used to be a real light wood, and then it darkens over time. But that hair that's up there has been painted, and it's painted red. Now, my dad's not a redhead, but I'm just saying. And you can still see it today and the difference of it. And so again, we're at the 4th and 5th dynasties. Now, here's that weird effect where here's one that again looks like a friend of mine that I have. But he doesn't have as big ears. But that big ear thing is actually this I hear, I understand everything, I hear whispers. You know, don't try it type of thing. He also has these crystal blue eyes here. But it's kind of strange because it says he's 13th dynasty. So 1700 BC, a few hundred years after the last people ever used any crystals. Now, unless people are going around and stealing them, but if they're stealing them to use on something else, it doesn't show up. Unless these were stolen to make this, which they say is 13th dynasty, but then with a name like Aubrey Hor, there are people who have said this could be Horaha and his statue of representation, because where it was found with this other group doesn't fit in with the idea they tried to go with. Irregardless, this in Cairo Museum, you can see it nowadays. It's also one of those ones that have that weird crystal blue eyes, but in this version, and you can kind of see it here, if you're at other angles, they glow, but it glows like steely blue-gray. If you get in the right point, all of a sudden it turns to a blue. I mean, it turns to a blue like my pointer, turns to. It's quite blue. So here we can see that effect where I was talking about how those rings around the eyes are actually an encrusted ring, but this has gotten old and encrusted. Doesn't look good like the copper ones does. Of course, both of them are made of copper, but that one guy that looks kind of like my dad is copper. Never mind. What's weird about those two is that this is a plug and play type thing where they have this eye thing set up with the ring around it. All those pieces made as one deal, and it's actually pretty thick like this. They dig out the statue so it fits perfectly, and they take and slide that thing in there. That's the way they're done on all the statues, including the wood one we were just looking at. Pretty. Here's one of my favorites, and everybody uses this and so on. It's not too hard to see this guy. A lot of people try to say, oh, it's all screwed up and everything, so how could you tell? You can tell the skin color that goes on here, and hey, look at me. But those are crystal blue eyes, and those are one of the better ones and the better set. They're matched and everything, and it really looks like this dude's just staring you down. He's got a little pinstripe mustache that you can just barely see the left part of there too. This is Mitri. He comes from the end of the 5th dynasty, actually 6th is where he shows up. Here we're looking at Rahotep on the left and Nofret. They're from Idum. These are famous. A lot of people will show these. But did you know they were related to Khufu and the people that started the very first pyramids and so on? Yeah, these are sons and ended up being cousins and nephews and so on. It's quite interesting. In fact, I probably ought to just go ahead and show you now and come back to later on that. Let's take a look at Well, let's take a look at Khufu's granddaughter. How about that, for starters? Well, if you simply Google image granddaughter of Khufu, that's why I've gone here. You can look through here, and then a lot of times they'll show you this picture. They'll even show you it fixed up a little better, but this girl on the left here has got red hair. This is the one I always say looks like a 1980s new waver here with the shoulder pads up, all pretty in pink or something, looking all do-do-do, you know, kind of looking. Guy in the middle seems to be about middle colored. Guy in the far right, though, he's real dark compared to them. What's going on? Because she's so pale. Well, there's that male and female thing too, but guy on the right's blonde haired too. That's actually on an Egypt Today site. But so yeah, Egypt Today. Egypt organized a virtual visit to the tomb of King Khufu's daughter. So here's here's one. There's one of those reserve heads. And who's that come from? I mean, that's one of those, I'm not ambiguous at all, Nordic looking ones that we were looking at earlier, right? So who could that be? Who could I be thinking of? Let's just click on it and go to it here real quick. Who is this guy? Well, this is that Senefru Seneb that I talked about earlier. He's a member of King Khufu's family. Yeah. Seneb was the son of King Khufu. A what? That's why they call him the prince's reserve heads. This reserve head was placed in the burial chamber close to his sarcophagus. This is possibly the guide for the Ba and Ka of the soul, guardian spirit of the dead, to recognize their owner. So they tried to make it look realistic in some ways. Bing. So that's why you can tell that they're doing that for a reason. The other connection. So, Senefru had Khufu, and it goes on from there. But Senefru, supposedly not with head of fairies, but someone else they call unknown, had Rahotep, and he married the lady we just saw earlier, Nofret, and together that ends up making Hemuinu, which we're going to look at in just a second. For Hemuinu was the grandson of Senefru, Cheops, and then his connection through the family, through Khafre, makes Menkore here, and that's the other pyramid. I wish I had the representation that I wanted to show you, because it really showed you pictures and people's names, and that just kind of sucks. And that other one that looks like it's exactly it does not have the link. It's not showing it. That just, after I get through with this, I'm going to click it again, and it's going to go, yeah, this is what you wanted, right? So, irregardless, that's kind of a good look at it there. So let's go back to where we are. And again, we just saw, hey, there are these people down the run of the people that had the first pyramids built for them and so on. Fourth Dynasty. You're still following me, right? So I know we're getting on a little bit, so I guess we'll cut to the chase and try to look at something that's a little more important. But one quick look again at Rahotep and his blue eyes, well-groomed mustache. And Nofret, her crystal blue eyes. And again, you can see her natural hair that's kind of brownish black up under that. Whether they do that slightly different for a reason or not, but to me it's always looked like she has a mop on her head, almost like Rosanna Dana. That dates me on how long I've been looking into this stuff, and whenever I saw her with this big puffy hair and some of the other ones, and I'm like, Yeah, and I said it to people, Rosanna Dana. Some people got it. Here's another noble lady from the Fourth Dynasty, 2600 BC, and people have said, oh, that's probably her. She's got the same hair up under the deal and da-da-da, blue eyes. It's got to be her. But others have said, definitely not her. Came out of a different tomb. And of course, there was a big stink that came out whenever Nefertiti, her new representation, came out, which they actually made one shade darker than this. And I don't know why they gave her a brownish green eye, but it's not really showing up because of the angle of the light here. But her left eye, which is still here, her right's gone, but that left eye is a crystal blue eye. And again, that's one of those anomalies because this is in the 18th dynasty that we all get into. And her genetics and things have been found now, and we've made videos about that. But her eye is a blue eye, a crystal blue eye. Did somebody somehow keep one for that long? I mean, all the way from the earliest dynasties, or did they go and muck one? They found in the workshops that they found that there's a few extra ones. In fact, the video I made about that fact, or about the crystal blue eyes, showed you ones that they were able to look at because they weren't pulling them out of statues and messing with them. So they were able to, well, here's some more that are like extras or something. Must have been where she got her crystal blue eyes from. So back again to the earliest dynasties. This is Kai from the Fifth Dynasty. Yeah, right during that time that we're in concern about, 2500 BC. This is in the Louvre Museum. And instead of being a standalone statue of a scribe type, he's got the whole pedestal behind him. So he's looked at as being more of a noble, an overseer of the blah, 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 blah. Crystal blue eyes. Crystal blue eyes scribe here in the Fourth Dynasty too. Notice the mullet. Seated scribe again of the Fifth Dynasty, unnamed at this point, 2500 BC. There's another good look at him. Profile. There's this guy known as Pinnernefer. And it's one of those ones to me that just looks like they didn't do that good. They made his eyes a little too far apart, just a hair. So it just doesn't look right. It almost looks like a doll. But this is one of those ones that you can stare at his nose for a second, and then you might go, oh yeah, I kind of see it more. And get a realism photograph. Hopefully the soul, whenever it's coming back into it, didn't have to go through that, like, is this him? I need glasses. Was the idea. So they were trying to make these things back in the time. I mean, this wasn't Greek artists and so on that came later. This was during that time. It was amazing. Before this, there's no example, people. One thing to think about here, that we don't have any examples of somebody making realistic type art other than this right here. So it's pretty good. I'm sure a lot of people, once they did the thing, the guy would show up and they'd be like, yeah. There were other times they made him and they made him kind of skinny and they were like, ha ha. Fifth Dynasty, seated scribe. This is in Heidelsheim Museum. This is Hotep and Ni, Sixth Dynasty. So pyramids have been built by this point here, but Old Kingdom in Saqqara, 2400 BC. It's in Berlin Museum. Kind of encrusted there. And this is a guy that looks like my sister's second ex-husband. That's a hard statement. Really looks a lot like him. He even had a mullet and stuff, but it didn't stick out like wings like this. It was more like, business-looking mullet, if you will. But little mustache, everything. Had an old Z28 sleeper car. It really wasn't that fast because Z28s weren't that fast to begin with, even if you hopped them up. This is known as Kenu from the Fifth Dynasty, so you can just call him Ken. Penn Museum in Philadelphia. They tried to make it look like he's got those copper inlays, but he doesn't, and of course doesn't have crystal blue eyes. So I guess there's a point here where people do and people don't. This guy is known as Ninkare. It's a Kara, Fifth Dynasty. And this is in the MMA Museum in New York. Here's a guy known as Ranifer. And they've got a few depictions of him. This is without a wig on, and then the other one is with a wig on. One wonders what his hair real color was that keeps up under the wig that was there. But I've quite often said that this looks a whole lot like a couple of the other guys we were looking at. So he is probably related, and that's probably the connection. And one guy that he kind of looks like is Hemuinu. And he's kind of important in this whole thing, and I hope you stuck with me here, because to end this all, we're going to take a look at Hemuinu, and this is the architect of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And so if we want to look at the pyramids and who built the pyramids and all the people that were involved, this was the nobility all during that time. And people, commoners, were just like these people, but they weren't passed down through nobility, just like we think of in England. Let me know what you think downstairs. Peace.